All right, so we are here with Pastor Tom Chang of Gracepoint Church. Yo, what's going on, Tom?
Hey, John, it's good to talk to you.
Yeah, man. Yo, so we're just gonna run through this. I'll just ask you some questions and we'll go from there. All right.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. So, Tom, tell me about yourself and what you do.
Okay. Well, my name is Tom, and I'm married to Tay Chang. Um, I guess really Tay So, because when we got married, she said that she changed her name later, but life gets busier and busier, and she never got to change her name. 18 years later, she's still officially Tay So. And so, yeah, we've been married for 18 years. We have two children. My oldest son, Barnabas, is 13, and my second child, my daughter, Hope, is 11. And so I've been a husband for 18 years and a parent for the last 13 years. And in between having getting married and having children, I went into ministry and then entered the pastoral life for the last 15 years.
Okay. So, I mean, everyone has a story, and I always love to hear their stories, right?
Yeah.
So let's like go all the way back to, when you were a child, all the way to now. What's your story, man? I know that
Yeah.
here's a fun fact for a lot of people. A lot of people actually don't know that your stepfather is actually white.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a very interesting story. So,
Sure. So I guess in a nutshell, I was born and raised in New Jersey to immigrant parents, which makes me, I guess, the second generation in my family, and someone who grew up close to the immigrant lifestyle. Yet, as someone that was born and raised in the States, I'm very American too, right? In all my ways and my style and things like that. So I lived in New Jersey for almost all my life, born, raised, went to Rutgers. I worked for PwC and corporate for 7 years in Jersey until I felt convicted and called to go into ministry. And that's when I came to Philly for Westminster. But through it all, definitely, I have two older sisters, and I don't remember my dad actually ever in my life. And so my parents got a divorce when I was really young. And then my mom remarried when I was in second grade to a American white stepfather, and he passed away in my last year of college. And so he was actually a big part of why I came to Christ and the idea of having a father and always missing a father, not having a father. And so when my stepfather came into my life, he was kind of like this godsend, right? This father image who took me to ball games, who provided meals, and was always there for me. And so when he passed away, um, I really missed all those things, but it really pointed me to the Heavenly Father we have. And so, yeah, all my life, that has definitely made a huge impact on me from my childhood in Jersey to now living here in Pennsylvania, doing ministry and teaching about our Heavenly Father that lives in heaven, right?
yeah, I mean, full disclosure, like Pastor Tom is also my pastor. We both go to the same church for everyone to know. And one of the things that I really like about Pastor Tom is that he's just like a normal person, like you and me. Um, and I know that him having a background in working from PwC, I can also tell that he likes the finer things in life as well. And I'm sure Pastor Tom kind of knows where I'm going with this. Like I always joke with him because sometimes I'll see him in like a Burberry polo or like wearing a North Face jacket. I'm like, yo, man, yo, how does a pastor have that kind of budget, dude? So it's always like a blessing to see you when we're not in church or whatever. I walk in, like, we run into each other across paths because you're just a real guy. You're a real guy, and that's the one thing that I really admired about you.
Yeah, thank you. Let me just definitely preface all those things. A lot of those things are gifts, okay? So my father-in-law gives me nice polos and stuff like that. I would never spend that much. It's way out of my budget.
Yeah, dude, I know that's something that I want people to hear as well. Like your transition from working in a corporate job,
Yeah.
obviously it has so much like a lot of people can relate with that, right? Like why like tell me how you got into your profession of being a pastor over working in a corporate field.
Yeah. It's kind of a funny story. When I first started dating Tay, my wife, there was an opportunity to go on short-term missions for my very first time. My church never had a missions trip when I was growing up. And so I didn't go until post-college on my first missions trip. And as someone that's never gone before, when I went to West Africa, to Gambia, my eyes were like, oh my gosh, I felt like it was open for the first time. Uh, my parents brought me to Niagara Falls. They brought me to like Cancun for a family vacation. And so that was the furthest extent of leaving the United States, whether Canada or down to Mexico. And so when I went to Africa, I was like, oh my gosh, it blew my mind. You always watch these like kids starving and things like that on TV, but it's definitely different when you're there and you experience everything. And one of the things is the first thing right when the plane landed, and even when we were going to the missionary place, um, they always say whenever you see green, it's a very healthy and rich area, right? And it's not just because it's the color of money, but just the land, having a lot of grass and flowers and things like that, it's a good place. But even when we landed in Africa, it was all brown, a lot of dirt, a lot of ant hills and things like that. And so I was like, whoa, what is this? And so, anyways, long story short, I guess we went on. I went with the medical team, and I went to assist these doctors, even though I have no medical background at all. They said just stay next to me and listen and watch and learn. And they actually showed me some basics of cleaning people's wounds, just cleaning it and wrapping it and bandaging them up. Because most of the people that came through, they were actually people who worked out in the field. And so they're using machetes to cut down stuff, and they would cut themselves, they would hurt themselves. And I guess their knowledge of taking care of wounds is so limited to the sense that they don't take care of it at all. And they think it'll just naturally heal, but it gets infected and it gets really nasty. The ones that when they came in, like they would cut off their finger and they would just wrap it up. And so it was really gross. I saw every layer from the skin to the muscle to the bone. And I actually puked, but I didn't want to embarrass the person of their wound. So I like caught it in my mouth and I swallowed it back down because I felt also embarrassed for myself. And so anyways, I was doing that. And then during downtime, I would play with the kids. And I saw this one kid and I would throw the ball really high into the air and he would try to catch it every time. And then as I was doing that, other kids saw and they started coming. And all of a sudden, one kid turned into 2 to 4 to 8. And it was like at least a dozen or maybe 12 to 18 kids. And it's like almost playing that game. I think it's called like King or something like that, where kids throw the football up and then see who can come down with it. And so it became like a mosh pit. And one kid the original kid I was playing with, he got trampled on because he was younger. And, the older kids, they were trying to get to the ball first. And as I ran to him, his toenail fell off because they trampled on him.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so I was like, oh, I know what to do because I feel like that's what I was trained to do. I know how to clean it. I know how to wrap it. And so I go to him, I clean it, I wrap it, and I felt so proud of myself. Like, oh yeah, this is what I was trained to do, and I did it for this kid. And as we were leaving town, people are like banging on the bus, shouting and cheering because just out of gratitude for the free medical services. And you just feel like a rock star. And at that moment, one of the members was like, "Hey, Tom, isn't that the kid that you were playing with?" And I look out like all excited. I'm like, "Yeah, that's him." And I looked down at his foot, and he had ripped off the bandaging that I did, the dressing that I put on. And at that moment, it felt like almost like a movie scene where like all the stuff faded to the background, all the noise, all the banging, and all the cheering. And I sat there, and I was trying to think like, why would that kid do that? Like, doesn't he know like all the people that were coming through to the medical camp,
Mhm.
that they had like infections. And I did everything I could to make sure he wouldn't get infected. And so I'm like, why would he do that? Doesn't he know, you know? And as I sat there, I kind of had an epiphany where I feel like God helped me to realize he doesn't know, right? No one has ever taught him about how infections work. And like at most, people kind of help him, like put a band-aid and you move on, but you don't really explain how infections work.
Right.
And
Right.
so in the same way, I felt really convicted about just short-term missions, as nice as it is to help people for like a week or two. At the end of the day, if that's all we do, right, just come into town, do medical services, share the gospel, and leave, it just felt like we were putting spiritual band-aids on, you know,
Mhm.
where we would tell them the good news, but you know, it's through one year and out the other. And I'm sure that they would quickly forget about it, just like ripping off a band-aid, and it
Right.
would have no effect.
Right.
And so at that moment, I felt really convicted that people need other people to teach them, to live with them, to serve with them long term, right? And that's why I felt called to go into ministry, to be a person that would be willing to do that, to live with them and invite them and walk alongside with people. And so people would really understand the gospel long term rather than just a spiritual band aid. And so, yeah, I went for a medical missions trip for like 2 weeks, and I came back with like a lifetime calling, you know. So it was a huge blessing.
And while you were out on this missionary trip, were you still working at corporate?
Yeah, I was. And so actually I used my vacation time, and Tay was actually hardcore about missions back then, and I wasn't. And so when we first met, I was like, I don't want to go into ministry, right? And she's like, yeah, it's okay. I'm not fully convicted either. And I was like, all right. And so as someone that was hardcore into it, as this opportunity arose, she was like, dude, you should really check it out. If you've never gone before, you got to go at least once.
Yeah.
And so the irony is, like, she was like hardcore into missions, and then she told me to go, and then we like almost flip-flop where I wanted to go into ministry, and she's like, really, I'm not sure if I want to go into ministry anymore. And somehow we helped each other, and 18 years later, here we are doing ministry together.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can personally say from our most recent short-term missionary trip to Belize, that was my firsthand experience going into a different country. I've had a experience doing inner city, like Atlantic City and Philadelphia, but there's something about going into a different country where, statistically, they're just not close, not even close to being at the economic level as we are here in the States. And I think quite often we hear the words of like appreciation, gratitude, those kinds of words being thrown out. But and you might even see like people who are not even believers, right? They might even see it and hear about it, but it's another to actually experience it for themselves.
Yeah, for sure. They always say, like, all the blessings that we have around us is sometimes a curse at the same time, right? Because we get so wrapped up in these things. When you grow up, sometimes without much, you don't even know that you don't have much, because everyone around you doesn't have it either. And so you live so simple and so satisfied with everything, but once you get a taste of that apple, right, it's like you want more and more. And so, yeah, it's weird. Like the blessings that we have around us, sometimes we turn it into a curse, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I 100% agree because when I was in Belize, and I'm pretty sure when you go out, you've done so many short-term missionary trips, but when I was in Belize, um, it was just a different like perspective because like you said, like they have way less, but like when I'm looking at it from an outside perspective, like looking at their lives, I feel like they appear to be a lot happier. And here we are complaining about first world problems, right?
Yeah, yeah, for
So
sure.
it's definitely a blessing in that way. Just for our listeners as well, like how do you define? I know you kept throwing out the word missionary trip. How do you define that? Like, what's the definition of it?
I guess leaving your home, the way of life that you normally live, to go into another style, another place. It doesn't have to be so far from home, but at least into another person's lifestyle, right? A way that people live differently. And so I guess the ultimate missionary, if you want to think about it, is the way Jesus came into our life, right? And so he left heaven. That was a completely different and perfect place to come down to earth, and to come into our lives and understand us, to experience what we experience and things like that. And so whether it's Atlantic City or, Africa, as long as you're kind of leaving your normal way of life to enter someone else's life, I feel like that's a mission trip in a sense, right? Because you're leaving a comfortable, or it doesn't have to be a comfortable place, but leaving what you're used to something that you're not used to in order to share the gospel, right? At least in the Christian perspective, that's your mission, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, another question that I want to ask is, I don't fully remember how we met, but how do you remember?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not quite sure either. I would say either one of two ways. Like, I think I definitely knew Jen before I knew you, but you
Right.
guys ran in the same friend circle.
Yeah.
So I knew Jen since high school. And so perhaps we met through your group of friends then. Or the second way, possibly, I'm thinking kind of out loud right now, is when I was at Bucks County Church, we had a gym, and a lot of people used to come play basketball there on Monday nights.
Right.
And so I do remember, again, your friend circle, like Topher and Jimmy and Big John, they would come. And I think you might have come with them maybe once or twice. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I definitely came several times, like multiple times when I was in high school all the way to like even college. Um, the only memory that I can think of that is more clear to me was when I think you were either coaching the BCPC church or you were like regulating playing time or whatever. And that was during the summer league, the church summer league basketball league.
I see.
Yeah. And that was my only like memory that I can think of.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely when I saw your circle of friends and basketball, things like that. I think, yeah, I do recall seeing you, and I was like, who is this kid that thinks he's so cool, you know?
Yo, yo, dude, what kid doesn't think that way though? Right? Like
No,
if you
I'm
don't
just
think that
messing.
way, if you don't think that
Yeah,
way, you trash, dude.
yeah, I'm just messing. When I look at from all of you guys from the outside, you kind of look like gangsters and you look tough and stuff, but you guys were like the nicest guys. I was shocked, at how kind that a lot of you guys were. Like even your brother at a softball tournament, I remember like I was carrying cases of water, and I thought he was just gonna be this like punk, but he was like, "Yeah, let me help you." And we didn't even know each other. And
Yeah.
so I remember your family, your friends always being like super kind, and I was like, "Wow, that is amazing. That's awesome."
Yeah, that is, it's thank you and I appreciate that. So I'm actually going to ask you another question about your field, right? Your
Yeah.
being a pastor. What is a common myth about your job or field of expertise?
Oh wow. There's definitely a lot, and I think even the way you were like trying to describe me as like not being like the typical pastor of whatever in terms of like maybe clothes or stylistic. I think definitely the most common thing is that pastors are different, and they're different in a weird way, right?
Right.
That is that I mean, it is somewhat true that pastors are different because the Bible tells us we have a different responsibility, and so we're held at a higher standard and things like that. But at the same time, we are, not that different, right? And so I think most people, when they think of pastors, they think of someone that's square, someone that's boring, no sense of humor, no style, right? You got to dress like, like like a nerd or something like that. And so, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, actually, many of my neighbors in Upper Dublin, when I share that I'm a pastor, a lot of them are shocked. And
Yeah.
again, I don't know if it's because it's a good thing, because it's like, oh, wow, you're normal, right? Or if it's a bad thing, like, whoa, you don't act like a pastor, you know? So I don't know what it is, but many people are definitely surprised. And I think it's because they have this idea of what a pastor is supposed to be like, the way they dress, the way they talk, you know? And I think that's definitely one of the biggest misconceptions of what a pastor is like, you know?
Yeah, and I find that it's like a hard balance, right? Because you wanna you, you are at the end of the day human, right? Like you have the same kinds of like temptation, sin that we all humans go through, right? And then also like
Mhm.
balancing that as being the face of a church, right? To a certain standard, right, of living. So it's like, man, like I think you have one of the hardest roles and responsibilities for sure.
Yeah, yeah, you make a good point. And actually, that's one of the reasons a lot of times I feel like when the enemy tries to get me to like almost step down and step away from ministry, that's actually one of the big reasons. Like, am I able to be almost political enough to balance that where I can be myself? Yeah, I gotta be careful as I represent Christ and being a pastor and things like that. And sometimes I don't want that responsibility, and I just wish I could just kick back and just not worry about things like that. And so that's, one of the temptations to say, oh, let me leave everything behind. But, when I remind myself of the calling and, what's really worth it, then, I get those whispers that the enemy tries to put in my ear. I push it away.
But that's why you also have other leaders in the church, right, to speak on your behalf, right? Like obviously people like me who, you know, I think I'm a little almost too honest when I have my opinions on certain matters or certain, subjects. Um, I mean, obviously I have my own faults in that way, but again, like part of that is for us to protect you, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that's why I appreciate the most about, especially the elders and the session. And, there are times where the wisest thing is probably not to say or have to argue or fight, but you just have to almost absorb and just take it and receive. And it's when your friends and other fellow leaders are able to speak on your behalf and be intercede on your behalf. It's super encouraging. And so, yeah, it just shows another way that the church is supposed to be. It's not supposed to be like a communist leader up top that demands everything and has to yell and look super strong, but in your weakness that everybody else can surround you and support you. So yeah, I'm really thankful for a lot of our members and leaders at Gracepoint for sure.
Yeah, and from personal experience, Tom, like from what I've seen, like you do take it in and you take it in so well. And sometimes I'm just like, dude, man, like say something, like say something, do something, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah,
but yeah, dude, it's definitely encouraging to find you as a leader and the face of our church in that way. So yeah, I'm thankful. Thank you.
yeah.
So
Thank you.
the next question I wanted to ask was, who has been your professional mentor?
That's a really good question. Um, Only because like, as we talked about before, growing up, since my parents got a divorce when I was really young, um, naturally, I've never had a really good like older brother figure, like an older mentor figure in my life, right? Since even from my childhood. And so um, I guess a lot of times when I was younger, the way I learned things is not by having a father or by having an older brother teach me, but I had to really just watch people and I listened and I imitated, right? And that was my natural way to seek help and to learn by just watching, learning, imitating, rather than really having that father figure in my life. And so professionally, I think I tend to gravitate towards the same way of looking for help. Most of my mentors, I would have to say, it has to be almost through like reading a lot of books and even listening to like back in the 90s when I really wanted to grow spiritually, cassette tapes was the way to listen to a lot of sermons. And so I read a lot of John Piper books back in the 90s and listened to a lot of Tim Keller tapes, like cassette tapes back in the 90s. And so, yeah, sadly, I don't know. I don't think it's the ideal way of having a mentor or leader in your life, but just that pattern, that's the way I ended up following and learning from older people by books and watching and imitating more than having people in my life.
Got it. And what's an insult that you might have received that you're actually proud of?
uh,
What that you dress nice and you wear Burberry polos?
uh, I, I don't know if I would say I'm proud of any insults, but I know what you're getting at. I know what you're getting at. Maybe in the an insult would be that I can be overly competitive sometimes.
Oh hell yeah, dude! Have you seen this? Yo, I wish I had footage of you setting the basketball screen. I think you are notoriously known to be a savage, dude, on the basketball.
Well, I think there's a fine line between being overly competitive and trying your hardest, right? And I think people assume like when you're overly competitive, uh, um, versus like really trying hard, trying your best. And
Right.
for me, for example, like when we play basketball, it's not really about the winning or losing, right? And so I feel like over competitive people, they don't want to lose. But for me, it's not about losing, but what I even tell my kids is that I don't care if they lose their game, actually. As long as they tried their best on the field,
Mhm.
it makes me proud that they gave their best out there and they lost, right? Where the opposite is also true for me. If their team wins, but I know they uh, gave only a half-hearted effort,
Yeah, yeah,
then I would be disappointed. I'd be like, dude, you sucked out there. You didn't try. Who cares if you walked away with the W?
yeah. Right.
So trying hard and giving 100% is, what I try to teach my kids and definitely what I try to do, whether it's like trying to put a sermon together or play basketball, like just do my best. And, sometimes it doesn't look so great, but, I'm trying my best. And so as I get older, I definitely feel more lazy. I used to hate those guys who play basketball. And it's like, dude, why didn't you chase after that loose ball, right? But now it's like I'm that guy on the court where I feel too tired to go do it. But definitely, I think that was in my younger days. I always wanted to try my best, no matter what, and I still try to do it, but sometimes I feel like I'm getting a little bit older and older, so it's harder to do that on the sports field or court.
I got you. And a follow-up question to that, what do people misunderstand about you the most?
Uh, Probably similar to what we talked about before. When I guess in terms of like temperament or my nature to like whether it's like fight back or argue or not. And what I mean by that is I think the world teaches to be a strong leader that you have to be like very outspoken. You have to show that you're intelligent. You have to like rule with the iron fist. And when you're a leader like that, then wow, you're a strong leader, right? But I have to say, growing up again, a lot of personalities, like my mom, as she got a divorce, she was a very strong woman. And
Right.
so she was like the big aunt that everyone was scared of. Like, you don't run around the house or church because she'll stop you and yell at you for doing that. And so I grew up with very strong personalities and I hated it. And that's why I said I never want to be like that. And partly I also believe in terms of if you really get the gospel, that's what the gospel teaches too. That it's less about yourself, but more about Jesus. And so if you get that, I feel like it should drive you to be more humble, right? More kind, more thoughtful. And so, yeah, one of the verses in scripture that I try to hold for myself, which I don't do perfectly, but I try, is to be someone that's slow to speak and quick to listen. And so, yeah, again, I don't display these things perfectly, but those are the characteristics I admire and
Mm.
what I shoot for, and to be someone that's more gentle. And I feel like a lot of people, even though they look at that as a sign of weakness, I think it's actually strength that you're able to be humble in a tough situation. I think that's one of the hardest things to do. And so I think when people see that, they think I'm weak, but you know, it's one of those things I'm starting to learn that I just have to let them believe what they believe and take the standards that they appreciate versus what I think is biblical and what I really appreciate, you know.
Yeah, I think that breaks all barriers of the common myth that a leader is supposed to have a strong personality, but in fact, it's like, well, you know, you've personally dealt with it, you've seen it, and obviously that's something that you feel that doesn't fit your, fit your style. And here you are, you're a leader. You're a leader of our
Mm.
church, so that's really encouraging. Now, what are some suggestions? So we're going to talk about a little slightly about faith, right? So what are some suggestions you have for people who are struggling with their faith?
Um, Usually I tell them two simple things. I think the greatest command of the Bible is to love God and to love God's people, right? And so when you get away from those two things is when people start to struggle, right? You wanna, if you're struggling, what do you do to not struggle? Rather than running away from God, you need to run towards Him, right? You need to go to worship. You need to spend time with Him, just talking to Him, like even the way we're talking, to talk to God like that when we're frustrated, just be like, dang God, like why? Like talk to God like that and just see what He says in His word, how much He wants to show us that He loves us. And then on top of that, just like any relationship, um, you need relationships with people at church, right? When scripture says love God and love God's people, you need to surround yourself with godly friends, people that will point you to Jesus. And when you look at the Bible, it's filled with people who have companionship, right? Adam and Eve, there's Ruth and Naomi, David and Jonathan, we looked at on Sunday. And so Christianity is never meant to be done solo, but it's meant to be done in community. And so if you're struggling in your faith, we definitely need to come to church. We definitely need to go to growth group, go to men's group, women's group. Not so much because we have to do these things, but what comes out of these things, right? Relationships and with people and with God. And the more you build that, just like any relationship, right? If you and I are friends, John, and we don't talk for like years, how could we ever grow in our friendship, But the
Right.
more we talk, the more we do like things like this, we get closer. And it's the same thing spiritually. Like you want to get close to God, you need to spend more time talking to God and talking to God's people.
Right. Yeah, we're gonna try to wrap this up here, and I'll ask you two more questions. What is the church looking for to make your job easier? I know a common answer would be either for more members to volunteer or anything along the lines of that. But if the church could fill a specific role, make a purchase, an acquisition, what is one thing that you would need, you personally as a pastor, the head pastor, would need help with?
Um, yeah, definitely, like you said, the most ideal thing is having just members active, right? Being like having members that love Jesus so much that it's not like pulling teeth to make people serve, but just because you love Jesus, you want to serve, right? You want to come to worship consistently. You want to give and be missional. That's probably the most ideal thing. But I guess besides that, I think one of the things about Gracepoint that's been awesome is it's always been like a team environment, right? There's always been multiple pastors and interns like Chris that became a pastor and stuff like that. And so slowly, for one reason or another, we don't have a team as much, and so I'm solo as a pastor. But I do appreciate how the session is doing their best. They're searching high and low to find another pastor, and we've been praying, and I think we're pretty close to finding someone. And
Right.
so I'm really grateful that the church has this mentality that it has to be a team effort rather than here's the keys to the kingdom. It's your job to do everything, you know? And so, yeah, having another pastor working as a team, I think that's probably second best after having active members. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And where can our listeners find you?
I guess to listen to sermons, you know, you can go online, you can go on YouTube and things like that. But honestly, I would encourage, if you ever gone to anything live, right? Whether it's like a music concert, a live sporting event, or even to a museum to see a painting in person versus a picture of it online, right? It's not the same when you do these things.
Right.
And so even though you can watch online and on YouTube, I would really encourage, you know, you to come to church. Come to we rent at a Philmont Christian Academy and we meet on Sundays at 10:15. And so I pray that you would come and listen live and not just listen to the sermon, but there's so many other things that add to the worship, right? Which is we have a great praise team. We have people coming up praying. We have really friendly congregation members that will welcome you. And I feel like when you put all those things together, that's the strength of Gracepoint, not just finding me or listening to me, but you got to experience all that together. And that makes an awesome Sunday at Gracepoint, you know? And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I would say come to Philmont and check out
Well,
our worship.
everyone's gonna know that I'm there too, you know. So that should help.
That's right.
Yeah. But dude, Pastor Tom, it's truly a pleasure, truly an honor. Yeah, man, this is a great interview, and I will see everyone on church not this Sunday, but the following Sunday.
All right, man. Thank you so much for the invite. It was cool chatting with you.
All right, brother. I'll talk to you.
All right, bye.
All right.